So your dad goes to prison. He starts a long bid. Ends up being, what, 13 years, I think?
Yeah, he got out. He did 13 years, right.
Okay, so he starts a 13-year bid. But then in 1988, a situation happens with your brother-in-law.
Right.
Talk about that.
So what happened was my sister met this kid, Frankie, who was a dangerous kid. He was an armored truck bank robber. I mean, he did a bid for robbing armored trucks. Him and his partner, Peter Sakara. They were both two dangerous guys. They did a couple of murders, and my sister hooked up with him, and he introduced my sister to drugs, and my sister wound up marrying him. And what happened was, even right before my sister married him, this captain in the Gambino family named Danny Marino, who was pretty well known, he came to see me and Tony Lee, and he actually told us to tell my sister to stay away from him because he knew the kid was dangerous and he was just not good for her. But my sister wouldn't listen, and she married him, and she became pregnant, and so they had a baby shower for my sister, and he was drinking, and he ran up a bar tab of like $700, and my mother had paid already for the whole party, and at the end of the night, the owner brought my mother a $700 tab, and my mother said, "What's this?" And he said Frankie was buying everybody drinks. So when they went home, my mother confronted him about it, and he started beating my mother up, and he choking her, and he threw her on the floor, and my wife, because I lived upstairs at the time, my wife heard him, and my wife ran down the stairs and jumped on him and started scratching his face, and he ran out of the house. And I, at the time, was in treatment. I had a little issue with cocaine, and I was in a treatment center in Vermont addressing my issue. And when I called my wife up the next day, and she told me what happened, so I got out of the treatment center, and I went to see Tony Lee, and I said to him, this guy beat my mother up. And Tony Lee said, "I know." I says, "Well, what are we going to do?" And Tony Lee said, "Well, we're going to kill him. We're going to clip him." And that was the beginning of it.
Okay, and I guess John Gotti actually sanctioned the hit.
Right, so what happened was Tony wanted to make sure that it was done, because ironically in the mob, you need permission to commit a murder. So if you commit a murder that's not on the books, you could get killed. So there's protocol when it comes to clipping somebody. So we had to put it on record. So the first thing we had to do was we had to get permission from my father. So my father didn't know yet at the time what was going on. So I went to visit my father in prison because we had to get his okay. And I sat down and I told him what he did. And the first words out of my father's mouth was, "What does this guy think, I'm dead?" So I said, no. I said, he just doesn't care. So I told my father what the plan was, and my father okayed it. My father sanctioned it. I went back to New York. Tony Lee sent for Jeannie Gotti, who was a captain at the time, and Jeannie Gotti came to the club, Cafe Liberty, and we explained to him what was going on, and we explained to him what we were going to do. And they particularly liked my mother. John Gotti liked my mother. He was always good to my mother because we knew him since he was a kid. So Jeannie went back to John, and Jeannie came back to us and said, "My brother said, go ahead and do what you need to do." And so we started putting the plan in place to commit the murder.
Okay, and I guess he was invited to the social club.
Yeah. So what happened was he was a thief. We knew he was a robber, and we knew he was dangerous. So we just couldn't do it out in the street. We had to sort of rope-a-dope him into coming somewhere. So I told him that Tony Lee had a score for him. We found a safe house, a drug safe house that had a lot of money in it in South Ozone Park, and Tony Lee wanted to discuss it with him. So I picked him up in the morning. I picked him up at his house in the morning, and I took him to Cafe Liberty, and he was, thinking that he was going to come there and hear about a score. And I took him into Cafe Liberty, and that's where he was shot.
Okay, and the shooter was actually Dominic Pizzonia?
Right, Skinny Dom at the time, right. He wasn't straightened out yet. He was proposed to, like me. He was a proposed member of the Gambino family, and we took him in, and Tony Lee and I took him out into the garden because Tony Lee had a big garden out in the backyard. So we took him out there. Tony Lee picked some tomato plants and put them in a paper bag for him and handed him the paper bag. And then as we walked back in, Tony Lee just grabbed him by the arm and said, "Wait, I want to talk to you." And I kept on walking straight to the front. And when I got straight to the club, I gave Dominic the nod, and Dominic grabbed the pistol and he went back there and he shot him.
Yeah, I mean, according to reports, I guess that Dominic shot him in the head a bunch of times.
Right, Dominic
Then
shot him.
actually,
Dominic
yeah,
shot him in the
and,
body, and then he ran out and he said this fucking guy won't die, and he put more bullets in the gun, and then he ran back and shot him a few more times, and then Tony Lee came out, and I was looking through the door and I saw him laying on the floor, and then Tony Lee walked out and told me, all right, it's done, you could go, because I worked in the number office at the time, and he told me to go back to work and, and make out, and that was it. So I said, all right, fine, and I left. I left the club and I went to the number office, and then that night my sister called me that he never came home.
right. Well, according to reports that came out later on, I guess that his body, the victim's body was cut open and they put stones inside his body so he would sink.
No, what happened was they took him, they put him in Skinny Dom's trunk of Skinny Dom's car. What happened was a couple of days before I went to this place TSS and I bought a sleeping bag, and I left it in the club, and then they put his body in the sleeping bag, and the next day they took him on this guy Tommy's boat. He had a big boat, a fishing boat, and they took him out into the Atlantic Ocean, and they put the bricks on him and everything. And Tony Lee, they didn't put rocks in. What Tony Lee did was Tony Lee punctured his lungs with a knife, and they slit open his belly so he wouldn't float to the top, and they threw him in the ocean, because your lungs and your stomach blow up and you float up, and so to prevent that, Tony Lee punctured his lungs and opened up his belly. But they didn't put any rocks inside him. They put the stuff around him, chained him up.
Well, ultimately, Frankie's body was never recovered.
Never. No, it was never recovered, and I didn't get charged with that murder till 2000. It happened in '88, in June of '88. I got charged with that murder in 2005.